Closing speaker, Janella, who is a third grade teacher, an aspiring abolitionist teacher, and she will be taking this away with our closing. Janella, I will pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Good evening. I'm so happy to be here. I don't know about you, but our breakout room was great. It was really interesting to hear different perspectives. We had people who grew up in very different places from around the world. And so it was interesting to hear our experiences with first hearing the narratives of the Black story. So from that, we'll hear from our other facilitators. So we'll start with Francis.
Okay, thank you. We had a great meeting of sharing. People really dug in and shared their first experience to many stories and pieces of literature that it's carried with them for the rest of their life. We had a broad group. We actually had a group. Someone was London and also lived in Nigeria. A lot of us were grew up around the Philadelphia area, which we wondered if that was chosen or just fortuitous. It was a discussion where we exposed a lot of our feelings of what touched us about the literature, and also it evolved into the place where we were saying that what our opening speaker really put across, that it's just not Black literature is just not about suffering and struggle. Black literature is about human joy, human suffering, human tragedy, and human triumph. And people could really share that and carry that with them. And each one shared their exposure to a realization of what this literature is giving them. And we pointed towards ways of continuing with a different prism to look at the whole broadness of any story that is a storehouse of wisdom, and that we have to draw from them and will draw from them. So it was just really a pleasure to hear different stories and people willing to share it. So I hope everyone had the experience we did. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And next we'll have Marie.
The experience was, the focus was on sharing our common experience, our common interests. We have, Ariana was in the group. We know her well with music and as an interior designer, and going in, looking into Black artists and architecture. But the focus there is that it's used to incorporate a variety of designs into the creation of the product. And it's not isolating, this is the design of a Black culture. It was that it's part of the whole culture. And we brought in, singers, books, Alicia Keys and her new book. And really it focused on how many common interests everybody has. Spirituals that are, and jazz especially, rock and roll that was, the teenage rebellion based on the African American songs, tunes. It's a very soul. It's very very powerful. Jazz is very powerful. Songs and poetry. They are the things that create a powerful unity bring us together in our country. And I think they're just, that's really the focus of the group. We didn't, look at very specific pieces of literature, but the whole picture of bringing everything together. And then one interesting thing was that one person brought up a hobby of birding, and we were like, birding, okay, and you are what, a birder? And then that brought up, well, that's my interest, and it doesn't matter what color skin one has, your common interest is birding. And then we mentioned the Christian Cooper situation in Central Park, and where he was birding. That's what he was doing. He was enjoying something that a lot of other people enjoy. So it was a wonderful group that was just a kind of an ordinary discussion about ordinary things in life. So I thank my group, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie. And now we will have Jerome.
Yes, here I am, and I had a wonderful group. It was really a very interesting set of stories. So we actually very much focused around the questions that we had, and we started by saying that indeed the first perhaps exposure or introduction to Black stories were not that numerous. I mean, if you look at TV or TV show or movies, a lot of the Black characters are sidekick or secondary character or even tertiary character. You barely notice them, but somehow you see that they are there, but they didn't take really a front stage. On a different thing, another person said, yes, but in my family, we had, we were really avid of reading. So my parents had a lot of books and wanted us to read. And there was apparently a fair selection of good books that were Black stories related. Especially, for example, this person said that, well, I actually came across this wonderful book that I enjoy very much and I still have, that were all about African folktales. And that was, of course, a selection also, and what was the exposure from their parents. Someone is unmuted. And of course, she also had access to a lot of other books like this and stories and sci-fi and all of that. But at the same time, one point came up is that growing up, trying to find also literature is very hard. And in fact, one of the things that we mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, is that if you want to learn about African history, you actually have to go to Africa. So she made a conscious effort to learn about the history of Botswana. But it's not easy. And I thought that's interesting because actually part of the curriculum in US, you learn about European history, Greek history, Roman history, and even Australian history. But somehow there's this big giant continent in the middle, just right there on the map, called Africa. And you don't have actually that many places that teach African history, which is definitely something that one would think that needs to be changed. Another person shared the story of her life, so saying that her parents were very busy and there were always, people taking care of the children. Herself, she was, of course, a kid at the time, and saying that the people at home taking care of the children were all Black women. And what they had is something that our parents didn't have, which is time. And time also allowed them to basically tell stories and tales, but also stories, personal stories, and personal stories that were very useful and enriching later on in life, because, herself, she had also similar experience. She told us the story of, relatives from both sides fighting in the Vietnam War, and perhaps having the war being a great equalizer and having similar experience from both sides. But there was also an extension of that, saying that later on in her life, she also met a woman, a Black woman, that became very good friends. But she thought she was very harsh with her children. And then discussing and trying to relate and go through, they realized that there are so much out there that they will need to face, that the education became very strict. And another person said, yes, it was the same experience for her, where when she grew up, it was like, in order to get the children to calm down, you would say, be quiet, or the white people will come and take you away, which I thought that, wow, okay. I never heard something like this myself, but it's a kind of things perpetrated down the road. Then we thought about the second question, which is what can we do? And, we related to last week's discussion about decolonizing the curriculum and changing the vocabulary from the very start. But we also thought that movies in the time now, of COVID and so on, and perhaps even more so recently, are doing a very good job to cast a wonderful set of characters that are, for example, Black characters. So we heard about Sophie's Love, One Night in Miami, or Malcolm and Mary, that were examples of movies that certainly show that there is a cultural shift, and perhaps more in a movie industry than basically in a book industry. So, and then we also thought that in order to do something ourselves, is that when we come across those wonderful movies or those wonderful books, the availability of books is not super wide. Obviously, the person that said, well, I had this wonderful African Tale book, well, of course, the parents selected, so she had it and, can, show to other people. But perhaps what we need to do is we need to do that ourselves. Like when we come across good literature or good movies, let's recommend to our friends and make sure that this is how we just tell people there is an alternative, there is other things. But again, the general feel was on a positive, that there is a cultural shift, especially in a movie like genre, and hopefully we will see that as well as in literature. And that's what I can remember, and I hope that I make a good credit of all the wonderful stories and some personal that people shared with me. But I think that we ended on a positive note, and I was happy with that and the experience. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for Natalie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciated everyone in our room sharing their thoughts. We spent a lot of time on the second question about the sources of information and where you get it. On a whole, we're happy to say the work is happening and it's great. And Sitting Still has really enabled us to pay the right amount of attention to the right things at the right time. So in our room, we were from New York, we were from Pittsburgh, we were from Ontario, and we were from Vancouver by way of Irvine, California. We talked about the importance of powerful conversations, so stories, but stories that also then allow you to talk with other people. In using our voices to share perspective, that really helps us to appreciate stories. When we understand that people come into conversation with different perspectives, even having heard the same story, we can appreciate the takeaway for them is different. We won't know that, or we don't know that unless we have a conversation around it. And so one of our participants shared the fact that she is very mindful of the fact that information that's shared, any kind of information, comes from a biased lens. When you think about the difference between the news stations and the periodicals that we read, they all have this inherent lens that's their platform from which they stand. And they provide very thorough information But then it's up to us to take that information, not just from a single source, but to check various sources and make sure that we're clear on all of the facts involved. And so one of the things that she does, and I give her great kudos, is that she actually admitted to being a participant in some Facebook groups that may not actually reflect her beliefs, nor does she condone their actions, but she does periodically visit these groups to understand that perspective. I quite, admittedly said, I don't think I'd be that brave. I might have an opinion that might get me in trouble, but I think that goes to the point of being open enough to hear things that you might not like, because it informs you as to how certain things impact people, and then gives rise to certain behavior. We are celebrating the fact that the right conversations are taking place now, and we are able to render our own opinions without fear of retribution. But we also recognize it's important to be good stewards of information, and not share things that we might be doubtful of. And so there is a real need for us to manage ourselves accordingly and make sure that we are being advocates of good information. We agree that social media now has an impact way beyond what anyone ever expected. No one expected Facebook to be at the heart of a near mutiny of a country that's near and dear to us. Yet look at the impact of information that is handled in a very poor way. Special recognition was also given to the fact that there is information that is specifically curated for white audiences, where it highlights Black pain in such a way to get them to emote, to react in a certain way. We need to be mindful of who is preparing the information and who the intended audience is. Is it for me? And maybe it's not for me. But if it's not for me and I'm hearing it and I know it's being shared with others, I do have a duty to try to change that narrative and correct it when I can. Then we talked about forensics, and I love it. Pamela, who is in Pittsburgh by way of Philly, who has a very special connection to our opening speaker, really shared the fact that she really had grown up without understanding that color made such a difference in terms of treating other people in different ways. Growing up, she was told, you treat people the way you want to be treated. And her environment was different and somewhat sanitized, but she had the opportunity to go to a historical Black college, which was a great experience for her to be able to be immersed in Black culture, seeing artists, especially the literary artists, and understanding the writings. She talked about being exposed to Othello, and for the first time recognizing, that there was a group of people who were different. The Black Moor of Venice was certainly a type that she had never experienced or heard of before. So this awakening through Shakespeare, but also Roots, right? The movie. Roots went back and took us to Africa and shared the origins and the valid symbols and the importance of the culture and the way that people persevered to greatness. Being a forensic, having that forensic lens means pulling on different sources of information and putting it together in a very thoughtful way so that you can get the whole picture, recognizing that the truth, one truth, can have a different explanation by 4 people, one truth, depending on their perspective. And so that speaker or that contributor said, the word is history, but it is really her story. And it is a time for us to tell a story together. So I loved it. I want to thank everyone in the room. Again, we are very encouraged. One speaker said, I am in a charter school. We have these conversations with the kids and the faculty. I love that it's a broader conversation now. It's needed. And I just hope that we're able to affect change with telling more stories and having more conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And last but certainly not least, Malia.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, I had a great group and I thanked them, and I just want to thank them again for sharing with me. I think we had some incredible dialogue hitting on themes of similar groups. We started off with a member who had her dad was born in the 1930s and went to a historically Black college. And she followed in his footsteps and also went to the same college. And she can't actually recall a time when Black stories and hearing about the Black experience and struggle in America wasn't a part of her life, or when she just read books that were about just white people. And she really mentioned that the narrative and the story that she was given about the college that they both went to from her dad was from one perspective, and that was one narrative. And then when she went there, she was experiencing something totally different. And so when she probably tells her children her experiences, that's a narrative change of evolution of what people have experienced. And then we went into with another member who came to America in the 90s, and her first exposure to the Black community was through media, through television, and then later on through reading about books. And so she noticed a dichotomy between those messages. So in the media, you're really seeing like Black people represented as larger than life characters, like very like, we're here to entertain you, we're comedies and action and sports. And then you're reading about, slavery and that experience. And so, there's a lot in between. So when she would interact with people in her community, she felt that there was a wall because these stories are out there and they're the only stories that are out there. So it's like, oh, we already know what you think of us because you have only these options. And so it takes a minute to, get to know people on a personal level. It's like unspoken wall is what she called it. And another member who grew up in a predominantly white suburb, but her best friend growing up and was Black, and she met her, and when you're young, you don't know any different. You maybe could tell you don't look alike, but you just push on. And at 7 or 8 years old was the first time that this question had popped into her mind when her friend said, I wish that I had dolls that looked like me, or that there were people in the show that looked like me. And at 7 and 8 years old, she didn't know what that meant. But now as we grow up, as we experience more, we will start to ask and question those things. And I think that's very important. We even had another member who, didn't have much diversity until her children were in school. And so now it's like learning a whole bunch, learning different stories and being open to hearing those stories. And then we transitioned to talking about what are those stories that are being told outside of just media, even commercials, right? Even the branding. Everything we do is a story, and we're pushing a narrative. So when a member said, go into the store, and sometimes you wouldn't notice unless you're of that, that demographic, but on like Pampers, if it's a Black baby, it's just a mother. But if it's a white baby, it's both parents. So what is that saying? In addition to that, it's like, these commercials perpetuating these weird stereotypes, even characters in shows. Like, if it's always interracial couple, why can't it just be, is it not enough that if it's a Black couple, right? If it was a Black man and a white woman, why can't it be a Black man and a Black woman? Is that saying that a Black couple is not considered whole? Is that not a whole representative? That not acceptable? in our society? And is that the message that we're sending? And another member joined in and really just kind of opened us up even more, which is her exposure was Aesop's Fable and another book. I forgot the name and I apologize. But it was about, Pan-African experiences. Because even we're sitting here saying, oh, it's so dichotomous between the Black story being told as a character, larger life character, or the struggle. There's so much variance, but there's also so much variance in what we are saying is Black, right? In this world and internationally, because there is Pan-African Black, Latin X, there's all these stories that are in there. There are people of color in general that are never represented, and they have tons of stories that they would like to tell as well and should be told. And so that was, for us, we took a step back and we're like, yeah, there are a lot of there's diversity even within there. And what are those representations out in media as well? And, she talked a lot about even the Native American experience, and that also has a very myopic view on what is being represented, right? In the community. And a while ago, we talked about, Hawaiian experience, and we're just like, oh, we're a happy place. And it's like, really? So anyway, what can we do about it? And I love this. It's about understanding who are the voices in the room when this content is being created and trying to affect that, trying to find the authentic stories. Who are the people making the stories and voting with that, with our money, with our streams, making sure that we know that if someone is producing this, that they are understanding, they're not telling someone else's story, they're telling their own. And we vote on that, we stream on that, and we make it known that it's what we want to see, and removing the power out of the few. So thank you again to my group. I hope I represented you. Kung Hee Fat Choi, Happy Chinese New Year. And thank you all for being here. And also I just wanted to say, Brianna, you brought so many different people, and this is a very, very good example about how people came to hear your story. And now through you, I got to hear 6 different stories today. And it'll change my narrative and change my mind. And let's just continue to do that.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will close. So as I'm listening today to Brianna, and then in my breakout room, and to all of the facilitators who just shared, I've been thinking a lot about the danger of the single story and what that really is. And the thing that comes to mind, as Brianna said, for Black people, pain is not our only experience. And it resonates with me because I think that as I think about what I consume in terms of media, in terms of books, in terms of social media, whatever I consume, I'm likely to project. And so if I am only consuming a single story of Black pain and Black trauma and Black oppression, then to all of the Black people that I interact with and have relationships with, I am most likely going to project that single story onto them and really narrow their humanity and not see it. And so for the people that I am in relationships with, for the students that I teach, for their families, I will only see them for whatever stories I am consuming of them outside of my relationship. And because of that, obviously we have to be intentional to broaden our horizons and develop a really critical lens for what we are consuming. And Natalie put something in the chat as Malia was talking about how all communication targets a specific audience. And so as we're consuming media, I would challenge us to really think about what the audience or who the audience is that anything we're consuming is directed towards, and really developing that lens of what am I consuming and why am I consuming it. And so for a lot of us, I think, as Brianna said, in the past 9 months, 6 months to a year, a lot of the things that have been put out, a lot of the media that has been put out, the target has been to kind of activate people, right? Or the intention behind the media is to activate people. And while that's important, it becomes the single story, and we lose this rich multitude of experiences and a diverse just like range of emotions and love and joy and fun that we don't see. So I would echo Brianna's call to action that she gave us earlier. And I want to break it down into three pieces, I guess we'll say. So the first is starting with ourselves. And so that means that I have to be mindful of what I'm consuming. And so one thing that I've done in the past few years is I was doing the things, right? I was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates. I was reading A New Jim Crow. Like, it's literally on the mantle behind me. I was reading all of those books and watching The 13th on Netflix. And I was doing all of the things. And I had to challenge myself because it was pointed out to me like, oh, like you're reading a lot of like nonfiction. So I made a really conscious effort to just read Black authors who just write fiction books. And there's a lot of them. And it does take, again, like Brianna said, it's not just like a Google and you get J.K. Rowling. It does take intention and it does take effort, but it's worth it, right? Because it does expand our own view. So that's one thing. And that's just one really tiny sliver of an example that I have, a shift that I have made in my life. And I would challenge you to think about what that shift is in your life. And then the second piece is, now that I'm being critical and changing what I'm consuming, how does that then impact what I'm sharing? So if we're on social media and we're reposting the things, am I reposting the video of someone with a knee on their neck? Am I reposting the trauma, or am I reposting things that spread more diverse experiences? And so we can be only an example by what we're doing ourselves. And so taking what we're doing ourselves and just sharing that with other people and being mindful of, who am I following and who am I sharing that you should follow? Am I only sharing, telling my friends to follow the activists, or am I telling my friends to follow and support the local Black artist that did a mural down the street from me? And am I following them and supporting their work? Or am I, looking up whatever musician I hear playing? I'm in New York. So like whatever musician is playing on the subway and they have their little sign with their Instagram handle, like, do I look them up and share that with people that I know? Again, changing the narrative so we're not just sharing people and their trauma. And then the last piece is for anyone who's on the call who's an educator or even a parent. But what am I sharing with my students or my children, especially if they're white children, but also if they're Black children? I, as a teacher in Brooklyn, I teach for my whole career. I've taught, almost all Black and brown children. And my trajectory of teaching Black stories and sharing Black stories and being mindful of my place as a white teacher sharing those stories has definitely evolved throughout my career. And I have seen how my consumption impacts the way that I share with students. And one shift, again, that I made this year was we talk about challenging status quo throughout the year, right? Like, this is something we've talked about since the first week of school. But this year for Black History Month, my co-teacher and I gave my kids a poll. And we gave our third graders a poll and said, what topics do you want to talk about for Black History Month? And our kids said, almost every kid said scientists, inventors, musicians, and artists. And a few said athletes, and a few said dancers, and a few said writers. And maybe one or two said activists. And it just wasn't something they were interested in learning about this Black History Month. And that was okay. And we let that be okay. So our Black History Month celebrations for the past few weeks have centered around Nat King Cole and Duke Ellington and the Jackson 5. We were listening to Whitney Houston today. And we were talking about Mae Jemison and Katherine Johnston. And, we talked about George Washington Carver and Garrett Morgan. But then we did some of our own digging, and we had to find more inventors because we were running out of inventors that we knew that we had learned about. So we did some digging, and we learned about Alexander Miles, who invented the automatic elevator doors. And our kids just thought that was so cool that, we have automatic elevators because of a Black man. And so, again, I think that is, it takes intention, it takes effort. It took us time to dig through and find those people that were important to learn about, or that we might not have known ourselves based on our own education. But it has been a really joyful few weeks for our kids, and they've just really enjoyed it. They've been happy. Remote learning is hard, but they've really enjoyed learning about, some people that they were interested in learning about. So with that, I think that the call to action after tonight is to really develop that critical lens and make some shifts, make some concrete shifts in what you're consuming and what you're sharing. Thank you so much for being here.